Howdy, folks. Do you want to experience the presence of the Lord in this life, even when life's tough? Well, then Psalm 16 is for you. Now, we're going to take our time through this psalm because I personally, one of my favorite psalms has one of my favorite verses in it, and we'll get to that when we get there. But I want to talk to you about experiencing the Lord's presence even when life is tough. And in verse 1, we have, "Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge." Now, we're not told what's going on in David's life. So it's a very applicable psalm. It's just some kind of difficulty, some kind of circumstances that David is wanting to be delivered from. And when I was a child and I was afraid, I would run to my parents. When I was sick, I took comfort in my parents' presence. Even when I was out in a strange place or a strange environment, if my parents were there, I took comfort in their presence. And so we have this very relatable psalm here that talks about experiencing God's presence even when life is tough. So let's look at this psalm today real quick. It says, "I say to the Lord," and this is one of my favorite verses. "I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you." Now here's where our English translations kind of fail us, because you'll notice there that we have Lord, all capitals, and then we have Lord with a capital L and lowercase letters. Those are two different Hebrew words. Lord in all capitals is Yahweh. That's the covenant name of God. And so then we have Lord with a lowercase O-R-D, and that is Adonai, which means master. So when I quote this verse, I like to say it this way: I say to Yahweh, you are my master. I have no good apart from you. Now, isn't that wonderful? I have no good apart from you. So in Yahweh's presence, there is good. But then outside of Yahweh's presence is not good. In fact, we are going to find out later there's a lot of sorrows outside of Yahweh's presence. But he says, I say to Yahweh, you are my master. I have no good apart from you. He recognizes that Yahweh's presence is where he needs to be. He needs to be following the Lord. So this is kind of like a statement of allegiance to the Lord. He is going to be where the Lord is, because where the Lord is, there is good, even though we may walk through the valley of the shadow of death, to borrow the language from Psalm 23. When we're in God's presence, his rod and his staff, they comfort us. And so if we want good, we want to be in the Lord's presence. But often our definition of good is not exactly what the Lord's definition is, right? We know that he is working all things for good to them who love him, to them who are the called according to his purpose. But we tend to like to think of good things as things that bring us joy and happiness and things like that. And so what God is doing, though, is for our best. So David starts out by recognizing, I have no good apart from you. In other words, whatever the Lord has for me, that's good. And so I'm going to trust in that. And we're going to see later on that this is a messianic psalm. And so, Lord willing, as we get into part 2 and part 3 of this psalm, we'll see how Christ fulfilled all these things. He lived out this psalm. So, verse 3 then, as for the saints in the land, they are the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight. He is going to delight in God's people. And we have a few New Testament verses that talk about us and our love for our brethren. 1 John 5:1, everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God, and everyone who loves the Father loves whoever has been born of him. So love for the brethren is a hallmark of the Christian, of a true Christian. And so Are you delighting in God's people? You say, well, quite honestly, sometimes God's people are pretty hard to love. Well, that's true. That's true. But, Jesus loved us when we were not so lovable, and we're called to be like him. And so we want to be with those who are also believers. And we know from 1 Peter that we are living stones being built up into a temple in which God dwells. And so if we want to be in the presence of the Lord, then we need to be with God's people and delight in them. And then he goes on to say in verse 4, the sorrows of those who run after another god shall multiply. So those who are running after another god, or if we say in the context of the psalm, they're running away from the presence of the Lord to some other thing to find deliverance, their sorrows multiply. And that's what I've tried to express in this graphic here. In God's presence, there is good, but outside of his presence, away from his presence, there is sorrow. And David says, their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out, or take their name on my lips. He is renouncing the ways of the ungodly, where their sorrows are multiplied instead of good. Right? There is no good apart from the Lord. And so when they go chasing after these other things or other gods for joy, for deliverance from their circumstances, there's just multiplied sorrows. And so we have a tendency, though, when times are difficult, to try to escape circumstances. But the Lord is the one who has brought us to those circumstances. And so when we try to escape our circumstances, we maybe even inadvertently escape the Lord's presence in our life where there is good. And so we want to be in the Lord's presence, and we want to be in a position where we're with God's people. And so we have in Hebrews 10:23 through 25, it says, let us hold fast the confession of our faith, of our hope, without wavering. For he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and to good works, not neglecting to meet together as the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. We're to gather together and encourage one another in love and good works. And so the place to find good is with the Lord and his people. So loyally serve the Lord and delight in his people. And so let's again look devotionally here at the psalm, and in these first few verses we see that the Lord is good. He's good. And I am, however, prone to try to escape my circumstances. I don't like it when life's tough. I like for life to be easy. But that's not it's not for our good. God builds us through trials that test our faith. And we learn to trust him and take delight in him and his people. So I'm prone to escape my circumstances. I'm prone to turn to other things for deliverance, which in turn takes me away from the Lord. And so that's obviously not a good thing for us. And then I'm tempted to stay away from God's people because of shame. Sometimes the difficult times or circumstances that I'm in are either something I've done, I've sinned, and it's brought me to a difficult circumstance, or it's just something that's happened to me that I'm kind of ashamed to admit or to bring to God's people, or even I just feel unworthy. Well, guess what? We're all unworthy. And so we need to be in the presence of God's people and loving them and serving them. And as we do that, we're in God's presence. And we can encourage one another and love one another and give grace to one another to help one another as we serve the Lord here in this world. And so the responses that we see here is David says that he's going to take refuge in the Lord. We should take refuge in the Lord, and we'll loyally serve him. He states his loyalty by saying to Yahweh, you are my master. I have no good apart from you. And so he is going to loyally serve the Lord, and he's going to delight in the Lord's people. He purposes to. And sometimes we have to purpose to, because sometimes people are kind of difficult to love, like you and like me. We can be difficult to love at times. But he's going to be in the presence of God's people, those whom God has shown grace to in saving and placing his Spirit within them through faith in Jesus Christ. And so we want to delight in the Lord's people. And then we want to renounce the ways of the ungodly, because sometimes we can turn to ungodly people for deliverance. We're tempted to. Sometimes we're tempted to turn to other ways, or we might even say other gods. We sometimes want to mold God into an image where he does good for us in a way that good is defined by us. And so we want to renounce those ways. We want to stay loyal to the Lord. We don't want to take up the ways of the wicked and the ways of those who are spiritually deceived. We want to remain loyal to the Lord. And so I'll leave you with some meditation and prayer points. Many of us are facing some difficult times. Are you taking refuge in the Lord? Or are your difficult circumstances causing you to be embittered against the Lord and seeking deliverance from your circumstances in other things or other people or other gods even? Are you delighting in the Lord's people, attending church regularly, covenanted in membership with a church? It's so important to be covenanted with a church in membership where you are responsible for others' growth in the Lord, and others are responsible for your growth in the Lord, and you can grow and encourage one another. If you're not, I encourage you, get to church and join with a good Bible-believing church. I'd love to see you at Faith Baptist Church here in Palmhurst, Texas, if you're in the area. And then the place to find good is with the Lord and his people. So loyally serve the Lord and delight in his people. That's how we can experience the presence of the Lord, even when life is tough. What a wonderful psalm. I hope you're encouraged if you're facing difficult times. I said unto Yahweh, you are my master. I have no good apart from you. Serve the Lord with all your being and delight in his people.